diminished today. We're down to 13 people. And Lorraine, is Lorraine here? There's Lorraine. And Lorraine, is your grandson with you?
Not at her.
Nobody's at.
But I saw him in the kitchen.
Okay. So tell Lorraine I said hello.
He'll be back.
And okay, page 119. So as you know, we're in which book of the Torah?
Deuteronomy.
And correct. And as I said, it's Parshat Ekev. And Moses is giving a series of sermons. You know, he before he passed away, he said, I have all these sermons that are on my hard drive, and I want to deliver them before I die. And the Israelites sit there and they say, how long is this going to take? And he says, maybe a whole book worth. Bernie, did you want to say something?
Yes, I have a question. I see it says here that he went to die on Mount Nebo. And recently on Jeopardy, there was a question about where did Moses die? And it said Mount Pisgah was the answer.
Well, I don't know the exact answer to Bernie's question, but remember that in, Riva does. Riva?
No, I don't have a comment. I'm just saying hello to Lorraine.
Oh, okay. So, but in the Torah, there are because, you know, from a modern scholarly point of view, there's at least 4 texts that were put together. And from a traditional point of view, because God just chose to name the same things with different names, there are numerous cases where the same mountain or the same person has got 2 names. So Mount Sinai is got another name as well. And it's possible that that's why there's 2 names for the mountain where Moses died. It's also possible there's other explanations. And now Lorraine is there with her grandson. Lorraine, you want to say hello?
Yes.
Hello.
Oh, such a handsome fellow.
So Lorraine, introduce your friend.
I think she's frozen.
Yeah, because
Okay, I guess not. Bernie.
Well, of course. Thank you, Babette.
Lorraine, do you want to introduce our visitor?
Yes, this is Jared. He's finishing up a pre-doctorate fellowship at the University of Chicago and has been traveling
My gosh,
this summer, exploring that.
impressive.
okay, she's sideways. I'm sideways. She's frozen. I don't know.
A new way of getting education, I guess. Credit, Jared?
Can't hear her.
Yeah, Lorraine, you're frozen.
Okay,
All
can't
right,
hear.
all
Can't
right.
hear what she's saying.
Too bad. Okay, so page 119, we are on the question of warning against arrogance. Let's get right into it. And who'd like to read? Minya, would you start us off? And good morning.
Sure.
everybody.
I have a question, but I think I'll wait until we get into it a little more.
Okay.
Moses raises important ethical consideration in these speeches to the people before they enter the land of Israel and before he goes to die on Mount Nebo. Recalling their difficult years of wandering through the desert, he tells them that God has tested us with hunger, long days of hot sun, and long cold nights. All that we were given to eat was manna. The years were filled with harsh trials. Moses, however, does not focus only on the past. He worries about the future. He foresees a time when the Israelites will be comfortable, prosperous, and secure in their land. They will have defeated all their enemies and will be enjoying a flourishing economy. He wonders what the state of their spiritual health will be in such a future of victory and abundance. Unsure of what they will choose to do, Moses presents them with 4 guidelines. Guideline 1. Remember the hardships of your past and how you were tested for 40 years in the desert to teach you that human beings do not live on bread alone, but on what God commands. Guideline 2. God is bringing you into a good land where you will lack nothing. When you have eaten your fill, give thanks to Adonai your God for the good land that has been given you. Guideline 3. When you are satisfied, have built fine houses, have increased your herds, gold and silver, beware of your heart growing haughty, of forgetting God's commandment, of saying power and the might of my own hand have won this wealth for me. Guideline 4. After you have defeated your enemies and you occupy the land, do not say to yourselves, God has enabled me to occupy this land because of my virtues. Several commentators note Moses' concern as expressed in his guidelines and ask, why this anxiety about how the Israelites will deal with their future victories and prosperity? Why does Moses focus on their response to success?
Okay, thank you, Minya. Did you want to ask your question now or you want to wait a little longer?
No, I can ask it now. It goes back to each of the guidelines also. But my question is, if God saved us from Pharaoh and being slaves, why didn't God save us from Hitler?
The old
We're at a point where we had all the things that were mentioned here. We had food, we were prosperous. People in Germany had fine houses. They were members of the community. They may have been Reformed Jews at some point, but they practiced their Judaism and they did what they were supposed to do. So I always come up with the Holocaust thing. So what happened there? I know there's no answer, but that's my question for today.
Right. And of course, there's no answer. I wouldn't even try to answer that, of course. There have been, I mean, there's a whole field of post-Holocaust theology. There's a book by Michael Morgan on that. And a number of theologians have tried to give answers. This is, of course, very perilous because, as Minya said, there is no answer.
Okay, back to the subject.
Any other comments on this? I mean, I think it's relevant. I just can't say anything very profound, unfortunately. Bernie.
I'm going to be the oddball here again and say that my observation is that when something good happens, it's because God did it. When something bad happens, it's your own fault. It seems to me to be a recurrent theme.
Of course, that's not, entirely adequate in the case of something so overwhelming like the Holocaust, but nothing is. But I mean, I guess when you have such a world catastrophe, the only one who can help you is God, and that puts a lot of pressure on God to come through or not to come through. And
the head is old, very old.
Other comments. If you're not talking, please mute because there's a lot of background noise.
Dental problems and had a terrible odor from his mouth. They knew that one of them.
Marcia.
I think it puts a lot of pressure on faith rather than the pressure on God. Or also the pressure on God, that you have to believe that somehow you're going to come out of that. A lot of it is not in your own hands, it's in the hands of other people, but you have to believe that and hope that pray that you will survive and you're in a circumstance like that horrible circumstance. And sometimes you just can't. I mean, you just mentally can't.
Rochelle, Miriam, Riva, Jennifer, Shirley, Lael, comments, anybody?
I have a question. I'm not sure, but Germans have been making war and part of their history from the time of the Teutons. They were always had violent history.
Well, that doesn't, yeah, I mean, that doesn't address, of course, Minya's question of, where was God? That's number one. Number two, I think if you were in Europe in 1900 and you would say which country was going to be most likely to express violent hostility to Jews, you might have said France. You might have said other countries. You would not have picked Germany. But, I mean, the Torah does promise a covenantal relationship and that God will protect us and guide us. It's in the Birkat Kohanim. And, I mean, this failure is very glaring. So,
I just felt that it went with today's reading.
it does. And, oh, there's Lorraine is back with her grandson. Can we hear you now?
I think they're frozen again.
They're frozen
Oh,
again.
no, wait, 50.
She's still muted.
It's getting out.
Okay, so we have these 4 guidelines. Marcia, can you comment on these 4 guidelines? I mean, why are they guidelines? What makes them guidelines?
Guess they're ways to approach whatever is happening to you at the time. When you're in a different place, how are you going to be responding at that point?
And what point is Moses thinking of in the future when what's going to happen?
I think number 4, after you defeated your enemies, do not say to yourself, God has enabled me to occupy this land because of my virtues.
Does becoming affluent and settled necessarily make people less interested in religion?
Probably, and complacent and say, here I am, I got it all, I don't need God, that kind of thing, yeah.
You think? So, but I don't know that I found that in my rabbinic career. I found Jews who are more on the lower socioeconomic end tend to leave the synagogue more than people at the high end, in my experience. But maybe I'm wrong. Comments on this? Does affluence and religion go together, or are they mutually contradictory? Can Lorraine hear us?
We can hear you now. We've been having some connectivity issues.
Okay, good. Yes, Lorraine's been having computer issues, for a long, long time. Is it the computer or is it the internet connection there?
I think it's the internet connection, but we're working on it.
Okay. So this is Lorraine's grandson, who is according to Lorraine, is brilliant.
That's right.
But it's not just a proud grandmother. He's got the imprimatur of the University of Chicago behind him, which is considered the most intellectual university in the entire United States.
Oh, thanks.
And well, that's true. So apparently Lorraine is telling the truth.
That's right. Only the truth. I was a Girl Scout.
She's got a brilliant grandson. And then now, what is your grandson's name?
Jared.
Jared. So Jared, that Lorraine takes 95% credit for all of your accomplishments.
I'd say that's about accurate.
So the question again right now is, Moses seems to suggest that when the Israelites come out of the desert and they settle down and they start making money and they get jobs on the Tel Aviv stock exchange, they're going to forget God and religion. So the question is, is affluence mutually contradictory with religion, or does it go well together with religion? My thesis is the opposite, that it's the lower class that tend to drop away from Judaism in higher percentages. Miriam, Rochelle, and Ray.
I just think it depends on the individual. I know individuals who are very affluent, who have no religion, have forgotten about religion, and I know some who give to their synagogues and churches and are very religious. I think it just depends on the individual.
Okay, Miriam says there's no correlation at all. Rochelle and then Ray.
I wonder if it doesn't depend on how the money came or how the money hasn't come. Does that make sense? Like
So somebody who gets a lot of money really easily, really quickly is very different than somebody who's worked for 20 years from daybreak to nightfall.
And hasn't really, done so well. Had the money. Because I agree with what Miriam said. I think that I've known a lot of people who are extremely wealthy, and you mention God and they laugh at you. I know people who are so poor, they give the most money they can, giving $1 a week to a church. But then again, I know people who are very, very extremely wealthy that give millions a year to their synagogues and stuff. So I think it does depend on the person, and maybe it does depend on the way the money comes to them or doesn't come to them.
Ray, Minya, and then maybe Lorraine.
Okay.
Here I am. I think that these last few things, these little bitty things that humans carry with them are so common throughout man's history, even in a more primitive time, and that Moses learned these things while he was prince in Egypt, and he knew that this tendency is common, and these are warnings to remember that the gifts that come to us in life are not just from our own endeavors, but also because of the chances, the abilities, the goods that are here around us and were given to us by this mysterious God, certainly not by us. It's an encouragement not to forget. I live at Freedom Plaza, and there are some tables that I go to eat, and a gentleman will ask us to join hands and say grace. And every time that happens, I think to myself, it's a beautiful custom, and we should thank God for what we have. I don't really think you have to be rich to be arrogant.
Minya, and then Lorraine, and then anyone else, or we'll go on.
I just wanted to comment on the people who donate to synagogues or churches. I don't think it's the money that counts. I think it's how they live their lives. There are plenty of stories of people, especially if you're from the East Coast, you know about rabbis in New York who live not very righteous lives, but I make a big deal of how much money they donate to their synagogues. So it's the quality of your life, not how much you put into the the money, the treasuries of these.
But the question I asked, which is a little different, is if it does affluence necessarily alienate people from religion?
Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you because Lorraine was asking something.
Okay.
All right.
The
You're
question,
saying- Go ahead, affluence has to do with,
yes, does affluence alienate people from religion, or is it more lower middle classness that alienates people from religion? Or Miriam's position was that there's no correlation whatsoever?
I agree, I really do. I think it just depends on the individual.
Okay, Lorraine, Riva, and Bernie.
Okay, I agree with Minya and the others that have expressed the opinion that it's the individual. I mean, some people feel a need, even if it's 2 pennies to give, and others, it's nothing for them to give huge amounts. It doesn't make them any better or any more humble or any more appreciative. It's the nature of the person.
Riva?
Yeah, I don't have an answer to the exact question you're asking, but I do know that there are studies that show that lower income people proportionally are very often more generous to other people in need than wealthier people. And if you've had time among some of the minorities, particularly the Hispanics, but also African Americans here, you find that many of them live in low-income communities, disproportionately so, and that many of them are generous to other people. So I don't know how that relates to religiosity, but I know it relates to income.
Okay, Bernie, Marcia, and then Miriam, and then we'll go on.
Skip me.
Okay, Marcia.
Okay, quickly, it depends if in some of these large congregations in large cities get extreme donations from very wealthy people, but that doesn't make them more religious or more believing in God. Sometimes it's a matter of showing off, and they put that money in and walk away and say, hey, I did my part, I gave you money. So there's a different, it depends on your attitude with different people, as Ray said, and Minya, it depends on your attitude. And so if you're buying off your religion by throwing $1 million, to fix the roof or something like that, that doesn't make you believe in God. It just make you feel like you're a leader of the community, so to say,
And Marcia, if you give $1 million to the temple this week, we're going to rename it Temple Gratz.
Oh, thank you. And everybody will think I'm from Philadelphia. Okay.
Miriam.
Well, what I wanted to say was already said, but I do think that people who have a lot of money, I mean, millionaires, billionaires, what is it to them to give? It doesn't mean that they are religious, but they do give a lot. The very, very wealthy do give a lot, even though, as you say, the people who don't have money are generous. But the very, very wealthy are generous because they have that money. They can't do anything with it.
You can write it off on taxes.
That doesn't work for me. I keep saying to the accountant, if I give more money, do I get more, pay less taxes? And they said, no, there's a maximum, and you hit the maximum, and that. So anyway, okay, so nobody really picked up on my theory, but that's okay. We'll go on. Early rabbinic interpreters who'd like to read. Lorraine?
What page are we on?
Page 120.
Okay, I got it. Thank you. Early rabbinic interpreters provided a clue in their discussion of guideline 2, in which Moses commands the people, when you have eaten your fill, give thanks to Adonai, your God, for the good land that you have been given. Explaining this guideline, Talmudic commentators point out that it was the catalyst that led the rabbis of the great assembly in Jerusalem to create the Berkat HaMazon, the blessing recited at the end of each meal. Concerned with fulfilling their debt to God, they reasoned that whoever eats and enjoys fruit from God's work without pronouncing a prayer of gratitude, steals God's property.
Okay, and
Want me to continue?
Well, let's stop for a minute.
Rabbi?
As reformers, we don't usually say the Berkat HaMazon, but we do say the Hamotzi before we eat. So we want to express a certain sense of gratitude. And this concept of gratitude, which is one of the character strengths in positive psychology, is something that's talked about a lot, that it can make people feel happier if you actually can express gratitude to God and to others, and that this is a way of appreciating what we have. And I think the last year and a half, we've seen how easily what we have can be taken away. All it takes is one, virus or one situation or something that happens far away, and before you know it, life becomes unlivable. You can't go to the supermarket, you can't go out in the street, whatever the situation is, it doesn't take much to destroy the veneer of civility that we have. Any comments on this particular concept based on one of Moses' 4 points?
Well, all I can make an observation when I'm and when I'm at a restaurant and I see a family join hands and say a prayer of gratitude to God for the food that they're about to receive, I always get goosebumps, and I just think it's so beautiful. I know we do our motzi and all that, but this is so visible to everyone in the restaurant, and it just seems to be part. It could be a rote prayer and they're not giving it much thought, but to an observer, it moves me.
Okay, Rochelle?
Yeah, coming from someone who has starved for days on end and had nothing for a very long time, I try my best to never forget to thank God, because I'm pretty sure that's the only way food ever got put in my mouth was from a blessing. I think that it's very important to thank God for everything, for your home, for your waking up in the morning, even just for having whatever we have. I think it's a great thing. I encourage people to do it, and I say blessings every night. And every day, every time I eat. So I think it's a great thing.
Miriam, and then we'll go on.
I agree with Rochelle. However, it bothers me to see this, where it says, whoever eats and enjoys fruit from God's world, steals God's property. It bothers me that they're saying that if you don't say the prayer, you're stealing God's property.
Yeah, well, I guess that's in the Talmud, in all of rabbinic literature, there's a lot of things that rabbis say that are extreme, and this is clearly one of them. That it may have been meant well, I think it was meant literally, but I don't think any of us would agree with that or would like that sentiment, right? So yes, I agree with Miriam 100%. I guess I'm wondering why Harvey Fields put it in, but he did. But it's not a statement that I would ascribe to at all. Okay, back to you, Lorraine. You can read Rabbinic Interpreter.
Okay, sure. Rabbinic interpreters believe that Moses was deeply worried about the Israelites after their entering the land of Israel. He feared they would settle in their land, enjoy its fruits, and conclude that they owed nothing to God. Moses presumed they would forget about all that God had done for them and reach the conclusion that they alone were responsible for their harvests of plenty. For this reason, says the rabbis, Moses warns the Israelites not to eat without pronouncing blessings of thanksgiving, not to enjoy the fruits of the land without acknowledging God with words of gratitude. He compares eating and drinking without reciting a prayer of thanks to stealing.
All right.
That's, yeah.
And this again, I mean, I guess I disagree with this entire theological approach. I see religion today in America more in terms of spirituality rather than a sense of debt to God in a literal sense. So I guess I disagree with the entire Talmudic approach to God. So I'm not somebody that likes to be radical or to openly go against the entire tradition, but I think that this is pushing me in that direction. Comments, Marcia,
Okay,
Jared, and then maybe we'll hear from Jared.
I have something to say too.
Okay, who, Babette, was that
Yeah.
Babette?
Yeah, well, two things. They're not acknowledging that God provides rain and sunshine too. It's not just hard work and tilling the land, but taking not focusing just on wealth and giving. Where I'm grateful every time I see a gorgeous sunset or a beautiful ocean. It's from God. It's not man-made. It's how we're living our lives, our good lives. I mean, here in Sun City Grand, we're living in summer camp for grown-ups. I mean, it's how we are living our lives and what has brought us here and what we are grateful for that comes from nature.
And Babette has a particularly nice view in Arizona, and currently you're in California.
I'm in Santa Monica, and I spend Shabbat on the beach, and we hold hands in a circle and dance on the sand as the sun goes down. Now, it couldn't be better. It couldn't be better.
And the combination of religion and nature tends to be very inspirational.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it also extends to the gift from God of artists and photographers who capture this and try to share it with the world.
But
So it's not just food and material goods.
But I think when Babette talked about that sense of gratitude to God, she's talking about it in a completely different sense than what the Talmudists were talking about. It's like a different religion. And so, you know, that's my problem with what the rabbis of the Talmud are saying. I don't see God in that way, and I don't see our obligation to God in that way either. Okay, Riva, and then Lorraine or Jared if they want, and then anyone else. Okay, Riva.
Yeah, I like the guidelines. I like the guidelines a great deal. I see them, I think guidelines is actually the right term rather than rules. And I don't take much of what we read literally, but I think in more abstract ways that it can be very, very meaningful. And I think the point that for me, the guidelines feel very, very current and still very valuable. And that is, some of us have lives that are much easier than others. And I think we know people that fall in the entire spectrum of good people who've been blessed and good people who've had really miserably, extraordinarily tough lives. And I think the point is to recognize that there's something beyond ourselves that has an impact on the quality of our lives, and that we can't just, say, look what I did. I was so smart. I worked so hard. I was so successful. And, I want you to see every penny that I've made in this world, that kind of vanity and that kind of selfishness, I think, is what is being spoken about in this context. It's saying that acknowledge that some of the gifts you've been given were gifts. You can debate who gave you the gifts or how you got the gifts, whatever. But some things that come into our lives are, to some extent, gifts to us, and that we should acknowledge them and say thank you for them.
Touche.
A response, Miriam?
But then you come to the COVID. Why are we having this? Why is God keeping this up like this? If God is responsible for everything, I don't have the answer to that.
Miriam, is that a permutation of Minya's question from the beginning that, why did God allow the Holocaust to happen? Then obviously the two events are very different, but in both cases, something that is threatening that appears to be, beyond humans' ability to control it, or certainly individuals' ability to control it. Are you looking at your question in the same way as Minya?
What? I didn't get that.
All right, never mind. Move on. Ray, Minya, Rochelle, Ray.
You're forgetting Jared.
Oh, is it my turn?
Jared, are you ready to talk?
Sure, I can say something.
Okay, Jared.
Yeah, I guess these guys also remind me of the line from Passover of like, remember that you too were a slave in the land of Egypt, and this idea of identifying yourself and having empathy with a position of not having as much privilege as you have now, and that being like a regular reminder throughout your life. I think that's really important and nice, and not something that I get from like in lots of other parts of my life. I see people being like, oh, all these good things are happening because you like earned it or you're hardworking and stuff like that. And I think it's good that our religion reminds us that it isn't like that, that actually a lot of things happen to us from other forces.
So Jared, do you have any sympathy with my theory that it's easier to be religious if you have a certain level of affluence rather than the opposite, that it's poor people that relate to religion the most?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think it depends on a lot of other things, but I do know, isn't it true that lower income people tend to be more religious, like just statistically?
That's something we'd have to investigate. That has not been my experience in Judaism. That I found that people that don't identify as middle class or upper middle class tend to drop out of synagogues at a much higher rate. But that's not a statistical, that's just my experience in 3 or 4 synagogues. Bernie, and then Ray.
The observation that you made about poorer people dropping out more than wealthier people might just be related to how difficult we make it for people who can't afford the membership dues to remain in the synagogue. I know we make arrangements, but some people would view that as demeaning.
I agree.
Okay, Ray.
I think we forget that what we're reading is all man-made. It isn't God who said, do this or do that. It's the experience of people for many, many generations who evolve a way of living and a way of understanding the magic around them that they have no input in creating. So you can't say this is part of God's telling us. It's a philosophy written by humans based on their experiences of the awe of what's around them. At first, did they automatically find ways to turn wheat into bread? No, people did that. But the wheat was there. The trees are there. The cherries are there. That's God. And it's just our way of interpreting it and putting it into this. And that, for that reason, I agree with what Reva said exactly.
Now, this is all connected in the next couple of paragraphs to the sin of forgetting, or the problem of forgetting. You know, how does one encourage each subsequent generation to, quote unquote, remember? Jared made reference to this in terms of the Passover Seder, but it's, you know, it's throughout, it's ubiquitous throughout the Torah text. Let's read a little bit more, and then we'll talk about this idea of remembering and forgetting. Marcia, do you want to read?
Sure. Rabbi Nachman and Rabbi Yochanan connect in gratitude not only to the dangers of stealing from God, but also to forgetting and denying God. Moses, they argue, is concerned that the Israelites will enter the land, enjoy great prosperity, and forget all the commandments God has given them. Surrounded by abundance, they will grow arrogant and deny God's claim on them. Such forgetting will lead to abandonment, abandoning both their moral and their ritual traditions. Will bring an end to the sacred society they are seeking to create.
All right, can't you create a sacred society without remembering anything? Or can't you at least create a moral society without remembering anything? I mean, we're rapidly entering into a period where history is not seen as having any value whatsoever, right? And, you know, the only things people study now in colleges are things that you can get jobs at, you know, whether it be nursing or practical things, but nobody studies history. And, you know, does that necessarily lead to a moral crisis? I mean, it would appear not. Comments? Marcia.
I have long bemoaned the fact that I don't know, Jared, what your situation was, but when I went to college, I was a science major, and I had to take a full slate of humanities courses, whether it was economics, art, comparative religion, English of all kinds, history of all kinds. And I found it useful throughout my life. But even though I hated taking them, I find that as I go through life, it stood me in good stead. And you never know when you're going to need that. And it makes you a more rounded individual. You understand things in a different light than if you take just totally computer courses or totally science courses or totally a business curricula. And I think it's a sad thing. I think in religion that, yes, I think we need our historical background to put things in perspective. And I think that's what a lot of people miss nowadays, is the perspective.
Minya.
I agree wholly with Marcia. I think the courses that we had to take, including foreign language in the humanities, made you such a well-rounded person. Whereas today, because history is not included In many cases, when it is brought to light, it's revisionist. And not knowing what was done when we learned history, revisionist history becomes accepted as the way it is. And that's not doing any justice to our future generations.
Jared, do you want to respond? You're the representative of the younger generation, and we basically all accused you and your generation of forgetting everything important. Jared.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of fair. I do feel like when I was in college, there's a very strong, at least at where I went to school, there was a very strong emphasis on practicality and employability and all of these very practical concerns, and less of a focus on, developing like a well-rounded perspective or something like that, which I definitely think is something that is tough. But I also see it as part of like college is, becoming more and more required for people to even be able to sustain their middle class status. And so for some people, they do need it to be practical. So I think there's some tension there.
So you agree with us. We were expecting you to defend what's going on, and you seem
I like history.
And you agree that there's less interest in anything related to the past, whether it be cultural in a general sense or about religious past, and then maybe in 30 or 40 or 50 years ago.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely think there's more of a focus on you go to college, you get a job. You're not going to like study the past or whatever.
Where did you go to undergrad?
I went to University of Michigan,
which is also a good school.
Yeah.
And so even at the more elite schools, then there's still a lack of passion for studying things that relate to understanding the past, even if they don't have any vocational value.
Yeah, I'd say that, except for amongst, some people who have a passion independently for it, for sure.
Okay. Riva, Marcia, Rochelle, Bernie, anybody? Riva and then Bernie.
Yeah, I think we're really talking a lot about ethics, even though it's not specifically phrased in that way in this context. But I think we are talking a lot about ethics, and some of us were exposed to that perhaps in school, but many of us hopefully were exposed to that in our homes. And I think, a lot of the Jewish culture comes out of the home. And I think that's part of what has sustained our religion, our culture over so many years. And that is ethical conduct, how we treat those around ourselves, how we share, how the Seder was mentioned, how we invite the stranger into our home, etc. How we behave towards other people is extraordinarily important. And I think that's really what's being stressed here.
And of course, in Judaism, you have Leo Back's idea of ethical monotheism, which is ethics based on the premise that there's one God. And in Judaism, as Riva kind of suggested, there's a certain intellectualism that is built upon figuring out what to do based on tradition, which is the Bible and the Talmud and the codes and the commentaries. And so it seems logical that you could probably much more simply develop an ethical code that's independent of Judaism or of any religion or any past. You don't even need Aristotle and Plato, but that it takes away a lot of the kind of fun intellectual thinking and reading and planning, and that's what I love about Judaism. So just to say, well, you should slow down your car and not hit pedestrians because that's bad, may be practical and sufficient, but it takes away, I prefer to reach the same conclusion by saying, well, Maimonides in his Guide to the Perplexed suggests this. And then Rashi, on the other hand, and it gets you into this more dialectical situation, even if in the end you come out with the same conclusion. And even in the end, if it takes 3 or 4 times more effort. So, but that's just me. Okay, Bernie.
Yeah, as I sit listening to this conversation about studies and what's practical, what's not, reminds me of something my grandfather said to me when I was a kid. He said, if you learn something, it might not help you, but it sure isn't going to hurt you. And I've kind of used that as a guideline through my life.
That's very nice. Marcia, and then we'll go on.
This is a quick side. As I said, I had to take the history of art, and we did, survey courses, Art 101 or whatever. And I thought, well, this is going to help me a lot. It was a chemistry major. And then I wind up taking a master's in community education, and I ran the senior department in San Diego. And I take my seniors up to LA and to the art museum. And I knew all this stuff. I knew all these artists and that it is school of art, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought to myself, wow, I'm actually using this, or even when I cut off the side of a triangle to walk across a road, a road, because I know that's the shorter way. I mean, it all serves you in some purpose in some way. And I, and just learning oddball little things as you go through life, as Bernie said, won't hurt you, because sometimes, you never know, it might help, so.
Okay, who was reading? We're gonna.
I was reading, I think.
Okay.
I got where I was. Okay.
And then I see Ray's hand up, so we'll get to you as soon as we can, Ray.
Do we want Ray first, or I'm reading?
No, let's read a little further.
Nachmanides also underscores the importance of Moses' emphasis upon remembering. He claims that the Israelites, about to conquer the land of Israel and enjoy its fruits, will assume that they alone have brought about all their victories and are responsible for the bountiful harvest of their fields. Such a conclusion will be logical. After all, they are strong men, people of courage and determination. They will have prevailed in war, and the produce of the land will convince them that they alone are the creators of their destiny. For that reason, says Nachmanides, Moses instructs them, you are about to say, my power and the might of my own hand have won this wealth for me. Remember. Nachmanides points out for Moses, remembering is an antidote to arrogance. He explains that the great leader understands the tendency of human beings to take credit for their accomplishments and victories. Self-congratulations are always a dangerous temptation. So Moses warns them to recall their history and cool their pride by remembering that it is God who liberated them from the slavery of Egypt, where they had no power, and it is God who sustained them in the desert wilderness, where they were helpless and hungry. When they are dwelling in comfortable homes, celebrating the bounty of harvests and their wealth, they are advised to recall that it is God who gives the power to accumulate riches. And when they are about to boast of their victories and gloat about their virtues, they are to recall that it is God who gave them the power to destroy their enemies.
Okay. Comments on these 2 paragraphs. Nachmanides was a mystic from Barcelona, Spain. He was involved in a disputation with a Jewish apostate and had to leave Spain and move to Israel late in life. Comments about remembering, about Nachmanides' ideas about remembering, and why Nachmanides thinks Moses stresses this point so extensively. Minya, Ray, and Rochelle, and then maybe Lorraine.
Mine is just a comment on the last paragraph where it says, we are to remember and recall that it is God who gave them the power to destroy their enemies. So that goes back to my initial question. Unless this was written so long ago that later history didn't play into this. That's the only way that's acceptable.
Harvey Fields wrote this in the 60s or 70s, so it was
well, then he knew.
And,
He knew
but
the history.
yeah, and I wouldn't, I mean, this Harvey Fields is summarizing what Nachmanides said, so it's certainly, I think, faithful to the originals, but it's not something that, like I said, I mean, if you believe that, then your Minya's question becomes impossible to answer. Okay, who is next?
Ray, I think.
Ray.
I just wanted to point out that our being here and studying Torah is just expanding more of our information. We're learning things that we did not know about. And that's what all education is. And thank God that I have the brains to have learned things through my life. And it is absolutely impressive to me that people through these millennium have been studying Torah so carefully and adding understanding that is up to date and changes probably the minds of some people. I am very impressed by these commentaries for that reason.
Other comments? Yes, Minya.
I just want to thank Ray and Miriam. I think it's wonderful that they're still so interested in this and willing to share their experiences with us and their opinions. I think that we should thank God that they're still here to do that.
I see Miriam smiling. Okay, other Lorraine, comment about remembering.
I don't think remembrance ever goes away. I think the Holocaust always comes up. I think bad things that happen are always in our memory, and good things as well. It's like a crease in a paper. They say when a child is born, the angels gather around the baby's crib and they recite the Shema. And then when the baby wakes up or is more aware of life, they forget every word of the Shema. And then they have to learn it over, I guess, for school. And wonder why would God do that? And what I read was, it's like a piece of paper that's folded and you have creases in the paper. And even though you smooth it out, the creases are always there. So to me, a remembrance is always part of you.
And that's why, like I just met with a family a couple days ago that they're finally thinking of joining our temple, and they've been living in Goodyear for several years. And now that their older son is like 11 years old, they've either got to join if they want a bar mitzvah through us or not. But it's not just about training for the bar mitzvah. I remember when I was in Wisconsin, I spoke to a woman who then must have been in her late 90s. So she's probably no longer with us now because that was a long time ago. But she said when she was a little girl, she once left religious school class on a Sunday morning to go to the bathroom. And she's walking toward the bathroom. She must have been, I don't know, 6 or 7. And she sees the rabbi, Rabbi Gunther Hirschberg, walking the other way. So she stops in her tracks and just stares at him, completely frozen. And he says, "Good morning," and he keeps walking. And so she said for her, who had only seen the rabbi up on this very high bima, it was like bumping into God in the hallway. She was utterly astonished. And 90-something years later, she still remembered that brief encounter in the hallway. And then, a few months later, I was finding these two, elderly guys, and they were saying how they used to run up to the synagogue there had a upstairs with a balcony they'd run upstairs through the stairways and go, run around during religious school the second floor and hang over the beams and everything. And neither of these memories have anything to do with Judaism per se, but they become part of the sense of memory that you associate with the Jewish religion. And so you don't necessarily join a synagogue for what they can teach you, because you can probably learn it better and quicker on YouTube. But you don't get that sense of experience, and the experience becomes memory. Rochelle, and then Marcia, if she wants.
Oh, I'm not. You're muted, Rochelle.
Sorry. I also believe that perhaps Moses may be stressing as well, don't forget about the small blessings that you received, and don't just remember the bad things that happen. Remember the good things as well. Although it's hard to not focus on the most impactful, which is normally the traumas that happen. Stop and think about the small blessings as well. Keeps you focused.
Can you do that? I mean, if you've experienced some large traumas, does focusing on small things, does that bring any sense of joy?
Well, absolutely it does. I guess it just depends on a coping skill at that point when it comes to a trauma. But, we can sit and, a lot of people dwell on a lot of very negative things. And I've worked with people like that my whole life. I've been that person. But just thinking about smaller blessings and learning how to focus on a more positive manner, because God is very positive. So if we forget about God, if we forget about those small blessings that he's given us, or even the large blessings, and focus on maybe tragedies, it kind of defeats its purpose. We were put on this earth, we were made to worship and praise God. That is just my opinion. And we should do so through the tough times and through the good ones, all the same.
Okay. Miriam, and then Lorraine and Jared.
I believe so much depends on your upbringing. I was brought up in a religious home, and I was brought up in a very, very friendly religious children's. We had our own children. I think I've told this to you before. Our own little house that housed the children's services. And I could never forget all that. It's very hard for me to forget anything to do with religion. In a way, I'm very spiritual. And particularly, I told you about feeling the way I did when my great-grandchildren were born. And I just feel that it's part of me. But yet, on the other side, I brought up the COVID because I have doubts. So I don't know what to think about it. So, but I have had a very good religious background.
And that helps.
That's the way I had felt.
Okay. Lorraine and Jared, memory, remembrance.
Well, I grew up in a house where both parents had lived through the Holocaust. And we were not religious at all. If you call religion going to synagogue, my parents did not equate religion with going to synagogue. They equated being a good human being and caring about others, never hurting anyone. And till this day, I live my life that way, never excluding anyone. And I don't think those are necessarily things you learn in synagogue or church, whatever your religion is. It's part of the moral fiber of a family.
So Lorraine, did they deliberately blot out memories, or did they just not have memories, or?
Oh, no, they had memories, all right. They didn't want to dwell on it. They felt they were in this country. They were blessed that they were in a free country now, and that we're going to move forward.
So they didn't have memories before the Holocaust, things that, of growing up in Vienna, or of bumping into Sigmund Freud on the street, or about the Vietnamese pastries. They didn't have those sorts of memories from before the Nazis.
We never discussed that, ever.
You think that they just didn't think about it, or they?
Oh, no. I think it shaped who they were whole life. And in a way, ways in them, my sister and I were brought up, they had a lot of fears. There were certain things we couldn't engage in that other kids could. But no, they never forgot. You don't forget that.
I'm talking about before the Nazis.
No, they never compared the two. Although they said it was the most beautiful country, Vienna, Austria.
Did they deliberately blotted out their memories to move forward, and let's deliberately not think about these things?
I think so.
So that's contrary to what Nachmanides is urging, or not? Lael, you've been very quiet today. But here, before we get to Lael, Jared, comments on your grandmother's comments about her parents. These are your great-grandparents, right?
Yeah.
And you never met them.
No, I mean, I don't think so. Maybe when I was like a baby.
Yeah. I met my parents.
When I was a baby.
Yeah.
So not that I remember, but I did when I was very small. Yeah, I mean, I wish I knew more about their story, that they had written it down somewhere or something. But I think it's also their choice not to pass those stories down as well. So I respect that.
I mean, I just, in my own family, my grandparents, they never spoke. They were in America. They were not in the Holocaust or anything like that. But they really didn't speak about the past clearly. Like even I just saw some photos, when I was little, and then they said, "Oh yeah, we went to Florida. We took a train." So I know that, and I found that interesting because, of course, later, everybody flew. But in those days, flying was still, this must have been, I don't know, in the 50s that they did the trip, or, late 50s. And they went from Connecticut to Florida by train. And that's all I know. And just because I saw this photo of them in like dress clothes, in an obviously Florida kind of setting. And that, so why would they not talk about this stuff? But people just did. They talked about the weather. They talked about, things that were going on that week in the newspaper. But, people, I don't know, don't talk about things that happened in the past unless you ask them. Marcia.
I know my mother and my mother they both were in Poland. And she would talk about how when the Russian soldiers came through, and her mother would put them in the kitchen cupboards so that the soldiers didn't see the little girls. But she never talked about the war and about the Holocaust. And I had cousins come over who did live through it. And I asked if they wanted to go back to visit Poland. And they said, no, they have nightmares about being back there. But they, again, didn't want to talk about it. They wanted to put it in the past. And I'm sure it was in the back of their minds a lot. And my father felt that that religion had caused all these wars, and he didn't want to belong to the local congregation in our neighborhood. But they were very ethically honest, kind. They brought me up with a lot of values that even nowadays a lot of people don't have, because they didn't have parents like mine, and I appreciate that, so that's important,
Minya, is that a hand?
Ray,
Ray.
Ray.
my mother told me that when babies were born, an angel came and hit them where we have that little dent and told us that God gave us the ability to know right and wrong, and it was our choice. And I've always felt that God helps those who help themselves. And what Rachel was saying, I believe, is very true. If you live in the negative, you don't move forward. If you decide that something can be changed, you begin to change it. No one comes through life without something that's unhappy or unpleasant. And if you work around it, you always find a way. And so whatever has been said about remembering and about where our strength comes is important. Everybody I knew who had been through the Holocaust refused to think about it or talk about it. They were living today and moving forward. And that's the way I've lived my life.
Marcia.
That was very beautiful, Ray, but I want to make a comment about the Bubba Misa with the angel. I had read a book that when the souls are in heaven, the babies all know everything. They have the infinite wisdom of the world in their heads. And before they come to earth, the angel touches them right there, as you said, and they lose all that wisdom because you can't start life knowing everything. You have to learn it. And that's why when you come back, when you start as an infant, you learn, incrementally, and you just accumulate wisdom. And otherwise, if you knew it all, there would be no purpose in living, because all of life is learning.
Lael?
I think I'm finally unmuted. I think that first of all, I think that we learned our ethics and we learned our Jewish values and our traditions. I agree with everybody who said it, in our homes and in our families. And somewhere along the way, I also believe that Jewish history and shut this thing off. Jewish history and Jewish values are somewhere in the back of our minds, whether we learned it or whether it's in our memories from before we were even born, because we seem to intuit it. Some of it just seems to come to us whether we actually learned it or not, and I'm not sure where it comes from.
It was the angels.
It was from those angels. They didn't erase everything.
So, I mean, do other people actually believe this, that we're born with a certain knowledge set that we forget as children, but it's down there deep in our subconscious? Or is this just sort of a rabbinic story?
Yes. Second.
Okay, that it's not to be taken literally. Now, I've argued earlier today, people didn't really pick up on it, that today our theologies, our approach to what we believe to be God, based on science and particularly on physics, but also psychology, is different, is fundamentally different than what Nachmanides, for example, sees God. and that as this powerful being that we need to, that the whole point of this section is that we shouldn't be arrogant. We should attribute power to where the power is, which is with God rather than with us. And I'm saying that doesn't really hold up. Maybe I was influenced by Minya's opening comment, and I feel a certain need to explain at least partially, you know, how do you understand the Holocaust, and that you can't really see God as this independent, powerful being. And I'd refer you to Nancy Abrams, whose husband is a Nobel Prize winning physicist, astrophysicist, who developed a book, who wrote a book about how we can really see God in a personal way, but yet in a way that's completely consistent with the latest discoveries in astrophysics. And to really understand God today, she says, you have to understand astrophysics. So as opposed to what's in the Bible. Now that may not sound very traditional, and I guess it's not. So, you know, that's just some of my thoughts right here, you know, trying to respond to Minya's opening comments, which really affected me deeply on one hand, but on the other hand, I don't feel capable of giving a sufficient answer to. Any responses, comments? Lael, Jennifer, is Babette. Babette is with us, but she's still sideways. Is your but the left side of your head must be getting a lot of blood.
No, I'm technologically challenged. I don't know how to correct this.
Well, but maybe we should all, in solidarity, next week, we should lie on our sides and put our left side of the head down.
Well, I'll consult my son to see if we can become upright.
Lily said she'll help.
Oh.
She said, no, if you leave me sideways like that for too long, it'll hurt my head. Any comments about arrogance and the central theme of this week's commentary in terms of attributing power to God and not to us, and that is an arrogant thing. Marcia.
I feel like I'm taking over here, but the remembering part, the tradition of Judaism with the holidays and all the backgrounds, stuff that we do all year to remember this or that or the other thing, and and Passover, and Dayenu, etc. I think that's what Moses was a worrier, and I think he was so worried that we were going to forget. So I think this is he's saying, remember it, don't forget it, don't be such a a know-it-all, and you're not the one responsible. And there's a real point there. Okay.
Okay, Lorraine or Lorraine's grandson, or both of you?
I don't have nothing to, I don't really have a comment, but maybe Jared does.
Yeah, I don't know if I have anything to add. Thank you.
Reva Scotland.
Okay, Reva.
Yeah, I grew up in a very assimilated household, but there was a strong emphasis on both intellectual achievement and work and interest in the world around us and in ethics. And for me, it feels like that's sort of equivalent to this business that we've talked about. And that is, so I inherited from my family, not the formal religion from the family, but the essence of a lot of what we think of as Judaism and the culture, and as well as to some degree their religion. One reason I've come back to the shul, and I was absent for decades, is that I felt as if there had to be some wisdom from our ancestors that I was never really exposed to, and that is worth learning more about. We come across some of it in some of this Torah commentary study, and that we can come across in other adult education activities that we might do together, that we could learn together what what the wisdom is from our ancestors and how we could learn to live more ethical and full lives. And so I think this is all of a piece that we might think of it as God or an angel handing this to us, but it might also be our ancestors or our grandparents or our parents passing down some of the wealth from Judaism to us, and that through our synagogue, we can enhance that.
And I would add to what Reeve is saying, that not only can we use Jewish wisdom from the past, but we can take current wisdom from areas such as astrophysics and psychology, even if it's not quote unquote Jewish wisdom originally, and integrate that into a Jewish worldview. And so we can provide understanding that transcends, what we already have. Any other final comments? And if not, we'll say the blessing and we'll see you shortly. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'yeh olam notah b'tokeinu Baruch atah Adonai. Blessed is Adonai our God, ruler of the universe, who has given us the teaching of truth, implanted with God's eternal light. Blessed is Adonai, give us the Torah. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. And so it's good to see everybody. And last Friday night, I gave a sermon going on what we talked about last Wednesday. And so if you were at services, you connected what I did with Torah study with what I talked about Friday night. And I'm not going to do that this week, but anyway, it was great to see everybody. And there is an outreach group forming that's next Wednesday afternoon in the late afternoon at the temple. So if you're interested in participating, it's just a one-off right now. Just let me know and I'll send you an invitation. Thanks very much, and see you soon. We welcome Jared.
Thank you.
He's going to join us every week now for the rest of his life. But we're pretty confident that everything Lorraine said about him is more or less true.
Absolutely. And thank you for welcoming him and engaging him.
Thank you. Sure look like family.
Bye.
You all.
Stay well, everybody.
Yes.
Lorraine, Miriam, my granddaughter did what Jared did. She went to the University of Michigan and then she went to the University of Chicago.